阁下将此车献予我，便放阁下离去，如何？
动辄就索人公法财物，那是本分无力惯了。莫非是天南哪一宗派的少主
？Episode 173 of A Record of a Mortal's Journey to Immortality highlights, from prey to hunter, the shift in status happens in the blink of an eye. When Han Li discovers that his opponent's techniques are perfectly countered, and even the terrifying Black Mountain can't catch up with the Wind and Thunder Wings, a counterattack has already been quietly planned. Picking up where we left off, the Wind Chariot and Han Li begin a chase. While the Mage Wind Chariot is incredibly fast, Han Li's blood-red cloak is no ordinary weapon. The two are locked in a stalemate, unable to close the gap any further. A short while later, they enter the vast grasslands one after the other. Soon, the two orbs of light disappear from the edge of the grasslands, disappearing without a trace, disappearing deeper into the grasslands. With Han Li and the Wind Chariot's astonishing speed, they have covered over 100 miles into the Mulan grasslands in a short time. Han Li activated his crimson cloak, shooting away amidst the blood-red light, while simultaneously scanning the area behind him with his divine sense, a hint of surprise on his face. He had already unleashed the cloak's full power, yet not only had he failed to shake off the strange vehicle behind him, he had been overtaken by a considerable distance. No wonder even the old man surnamed Yun, with his mid-nascent soul cultivation, paled upon seeing the vehicle closing in. This wind-riding chariot was truly a top-tier flying treasure. It seemed that unless he used Thunder Escape technique or Blood Shadow Escape, he wouldn't be able to escape. However, since Han Li achieved nascent soul cultivation, he had never fought against a cultivator of the same level. Although he was quite confident in his magical abilities and treasures, he had absolutely no idea how strong he was among nascent soul cultivators. After all, nascent soul cultivators didn't easily engage in duels. In the years since he joined the Luoyun sect, the two elders had only taught him cultivation methods, never actually sparring with him. In Qianqian City, Nanlong, who had similarly only exchanged a few blows with him using divine sense, unable to truly assess his abilities. Now, the mage in the wind-riding chariot behind him seemed like a good opponent to gauge his cultivation level. Moreover, he was quite interested in the mage's spiritual arts and supernatural powers. If he could repel or even kill the opponent, that would be ideal. If not, escaping using the Wind and Thunder Wings would be easy. The fight couldn't drag on too long, otherwise, things could easily change. Besides, being in the Mulan grasslands, he couldn't afford to linger. Han Li quickly made up his mind. His body flashed with crimson light several times, then immediately dimmed. In its place, a hazy blue glow burst forth. At the same time, he paused, his escape light circling around before turning back to face the area behind him. Glancing coldly at the pursuing white light, Han Li flicked his sleeve, and dozens of azure sword lights surged forth from his cuff. After a low murmur, they formed a layered azure sword array before him, resembling fish scales, its imposing aura quite astonishing. Naturally, Han Li wouldn't be careless in his first battle against other nascent soul cultivators. Besides unleashing all 72 azure bamboo bee cloud swords, he also summoned a spirit beast pouch from his waist into the air. The three-colored gold devouring insects transformed into a giant cloud of insects in the air, but as Han Li uttered his incantation, all the insects circled briefly before swooping down. Han Li's eyes flashed with a sharp light, and with a flick of his wrists, two azure hand seals struck the cloud of insects. Instantly, the swarm of insects, enveloped in azure light, engulfed Han Li. But moments later, tri-colored insect armor appeared on Han Li's body, crystalline and ancient, shimmering with a faint azure light. Coincidentally, just as Han Li paused, the wind-riding chariot behind him caught up in an instant. The mage inside witnessed the astonishing scene of the insect armor taking shape. The chariot, which had been recklessly pursuing him, suddenly slowed down and stopped about 100 feet away from Han Li. Han Li glanced at it expressionlessly, ignoring it. Instead, he took the opportunity to flip his hands, producing a flower basket in one palm and a small bell in the other. Without a word, he tossed the bell to the opposite side. A flash of silver light appeared, and the bell expanded in the wind, instantly transforming into a gigantic object several feet in size, shooting menacingly towards the opposite side. At the same time, with a thought, Han Li's 72 flying swords before him flickered, multiplying into 3 and then into over 200 azure sword lights. Then, Han Li uttered a low shout, "Go!" A clear, resonant sound arose, and all the sword lights flashed and merged together, transforming into a gigantic azure rainbow wave over 100 feet long, rolling towards the opposite side. It seemed poised to follow closely behind the silver bell and crush the wind chariot into pieces in one fell swoop. The silver bell, which had been summoned first, had already begun to unleash its power. As soon as it reached above the flying chariot, it spun rapidly, its deep chimes resounding one after another. Visible pale silver waves rippled outwards from the bell, enveloping the wind chariot below. If the mags inside the chariot hadn't been on guard, Han Li believed this attack would have been enough to inflict a heavy loss on them. After all, although the silver bell was still the same ancient treasure, unchanged, with Han Li's significant advancement in cultivation, its power had nearly doubled upon activation, far surpassing its strength at the core formation stage. Of course, the mage in the flying chariot couldn't simply withstand the attack head-on. The wooden wings of the wind chariot fluttered slightly, propelling the chariot backward more than 10 jong, approximately 33 meters. It escaped the area enveloped by the sonic wave. Then, a bright white light erupted from the chariot, and a figure suddenly flew out, hovering above it. At this moment, the giant azure rainbow, following closely behind, shot towards them, striking fiercely. Seeing this, the figure in the flying chariot calmly raised a single hand. A flash of blue light appeared, and a deep blue light screen materialized several jong, approximately 33 meters above its head. The moment the azure rainbow struck the light screen, an explosive sound erupted. Although the light barrier flickered and shimmered, it remained unscathed for the time being. Han Li, his eyes half closed in the distance, slightly changed his expression. At this moment, the mage chanted incantations, and then, opening his mouth, a thin blue thread shot out, instantly transforming into a giant blue python that lunged out from the light barrier, fiercely meeting Han Li's azure rainbow sword light. Instantly, the azure and blue lights intertwined, accompanied by rumbling sounds. The mage then raised his hand, casting a spell on the wind-riding chariot below. The chariot rapidly transformed and shrunk to the size of a palm, automatically shooting into the mage's hand, where he calmly stored it in his storage bag. Then, the man looked up at Han Li, revealing a gloomy and gaunt face. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly. This was an elderly man in his 60s, with strange blue tattoos on both sides of his face, and dressed in an oddly styled blue brocade robe. But what surprised him wasn't these features, but rather the astonishing fluctuations of spiritual energy emanating from him. He was a peak early-stage nascent soul cultivator, about to enter the mid-stage. No wonder he had so easily blocked his 2 attacks. Han Li had also clearly seen that the blue light barrier the man possessed wasn't conjured out of thin air, but rather released from a fist-sized round bead held in one hand. As for the blue python, a sweep of his divine sense revealed no material host. It was entirely composed of spiritual energy. This increased Han Li's apprehension. His expression turned icy, and the ancient treasure in his other hand, the flower basket, began to flash with white light, as if he was about to unleash it. Stop! Although your supernatural powers are considerable, you're being too hasty. I haven't even spoken yet, and you've already attacked without a word, the old man said gravely, his voice slightly harsh. What's there to say between a cultivator and a mage? Han Li frowned and said coldly. However, he still pointed a finger at the silver bell, stopping the ancient treasure's attack and causing it to float motionless in the air. The flower basket in his hand also lost its spiritual light. He wanted to hear what this mage had to say. That's true. But at our level of cultivation, sometimes there's no need to fight to the death. If your answer satisfies me, I, your master, can spare your life, the old man chuckled, speaking nonchalantly. Answer? I have nothing to tell you. However, I do have a few questions I'd like to ask you, Han Li said, staring at the old man with a mocking smile. He could guess what the other man wanted to ask without even thinking. The sudden appearance of such a nascent soul stage cultivator here would surely arouse suspicion in anyone who saw him. It seems you refuse my offer, fellow Daoist. The old man surnamed Mu's face darkened upon hearing Han Li's words. Han Li snorted coldly and then suddenly pointed lightly at the sky in front of him. The previously tangled and tearing azure sword light condensed in a large area, instantly forming a giant sword about 20 or 30 feet long, which appeared out of thin air. After a few lightning-fast slashes, the blue python was immediately severed into several pieces. Then, the giant sword mercilessly slashed down, seemingly about to cleave the light barrier and the old man surnamed Mu into ashes. Seeing this, a ferocious glint flashed across the old man surnamed Mu's face. Without another word, he raised one hand, sending the fist-sized pearl into the air. Then, he opened his mouth and spat a burst of vital energy directly onto the pearl's surface. The pearl flashed with blue light and began to spin rapidly in mid-air. Countless thin blue threads swirled from the pearl, instantly forming a massive blue net, 10 feet in size, beneath the light barrier. At the same time, the old man chanted incantations, his hands forming a hand seal. Blue spiritual light surged from his body, forming a huge blue orb that floated above his head. The giant sword had already slashed down, colliding fiercely with the light barrier. As Hanli had expected, how could the light barrier easily withstand a giant sword formed from over 200 sword lights? The result was a loud cracking sound. The light barrier was cleaved in two almost without obstruction, and then the giant sword sliced through the giant net below. Even before the sword's edge arrived, the immense pressure already bearing down on him. Although the old man still had a protective shield around him, how could he dare to directly confront such an astonishingly massive sword? His face paled, and he swayed, his body shooting back dozens of feet away, enveloped in blue light, thus dodging the giant sword's strike. Then, without hesitation, he waved his hand towards the orb in the air. This magical artifact immediately flew to his head, and after exhaling a breath of vital energy, it erected a light barrier to protect him again. Only then did the old man solemnly gaze at the opposite side. His face changed instantly, turning deathly pale. The insect shield opposite him had already dissipated with a buzzing sound, transforming back into a cloud of insects floating above Hanli's head. Hanli, holding a small, azure ice flower several inches in size in one hand, gazed calmly at him. When their eyes met, the coldness in the other's eyes sent a chill down the old man's spine. But then his gaze shifted, no longer looking at Hanli, but fixed intently on the small ice flower in Hanli's hand, a look of astonishment and uncertainty on his face. The ice flower, glistening and translucent under the sunlight, was exceptionally beautiful. But the old man paid no attention to this. What concerned him was that, even from such a distance, having cultivated ice attribute spiritual arts for hundreds of years, he sensed an astonishingly cold spiritual power emanating from the ice flower. Although somewhat unfamiliar, it instilled in the old man a strange sense of awe, which secretly terrified him. In an instant, the old man pursed his lips, his face turning grim, and said, "The spiritual technique I just unleashed was broken by this very thing? What kind of treasure is it? Fellow Daoist, could you tell me?" Hanli chuckled upon hearing this. "A treasure? You could call it that. As for what it is, if you're willing to tell me about the spiritual technique you just used, I'm not unable to say a word." Hanli said calmly after a smile. "What, you, a cultivator, are also interested in the spiritual techniques of us mags? That's quite interesting." The old man's initial shock faded, replaced by his cold expression. But Hanli, from the flickering light in his eyes, vaguely sensed the other's apprehension towards the ice flower in his hand. A cold smile crept onto his lips, revealing an air of indifference. The old man took in Hanli's expression, and his heart blazed with anger. He snorted coldly, then patted his storage pouch at his waist. A flash of black light appeared in his hand, and suddenly an object emerged. It was a small, seemingly tiny mountain. Hanli was stunned. Before he could examine the object closely, the old man had already begun chanting. He then tossed the mountain into the air, and instantly, black light flowed across its surface, and its size rapidly increased, reaching tens of feet in length in an instant, and continuing to grow. Hanli gasped at the sight. Without hesitation, he pointed at the azure giant sword. The sword hummed, then transformed into a streak of azure light, shooting directly above the mountain before crashing down to strike its top. A deafening roar erupted, sending debris flying and a burst of light erupting as azure and black light clashed and intertwined. Hanli's eyes narrowed as he watched. On the summit of the Black Mountain, he had cleaved a gap 7 or 8 jong long and 10 jong deep with a single sword strike, but this was clearly far from cleaving the mountain in two. However, right before his eyes, the gap rapidly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and before a second strike could be delivered, it was already more than half restored. At this moment, the mountain had grown to over 100 jong in size within the black light, indistinguishable from a real small mountain. Even with Hanli's usual boldness and composure, his eyelids twitched violently at the sight of the towering black mountain before him, and his face instantly turned grim. He knew without a doubt that if he were struck head-on by this mountain, no insect shield or armor could withstand it. It would be instantly crushed to dust. At this moment, Hanli's giant sword struck the mountain several more times, but to no avail. The old man gave a sinister laugh and pointed a finger at the mountain with one hand. The mountain peak whooshed by, suddenly appearing above Hanli's head and crashing down. Hanli was startled, having no time to ponder how such a massive object could possess teleportation abilities. A thunderous roar echoed behind him, and he vanished without a trace in a flash of silver light. Dozens of feet away, Hanli reappeared, now sporting a cluster of silver-white wind and thunder wings on his back. "Who?" Witnessing Hanli's instant disappearance, the old man was startled. His expression changed drastically, and he instantly retreated, creating distance between himself and Han Li, appearing extremely cautious. His eyes, fixed on Han Li, were filled with shock. At this moment, the old man finally understood one thing: his opponent was no ordinary early-stage nascent soul cultivator. With such teleportation abilities, he had no chance of stopping him. It seemed his mission was likely to end in failure. After all, with his cultivation level, he could only use the supernatural ability to instantly teleport such a massive black peak a handful of times. Each time he cast the spell, it would significantly deplete his magical power. He dared not use it too often. Just as the old man surnamed Mu was greatly alarmed and secretly considered retreating, Han Li looked at the black mountain peak, a hint of excitement appearing on his face. Such a unique and astonishing treasure was clearly not something the old man could have crafted. It was most likely some kind of amazing ancient treasure left behind by an ancient cultivator. And judging by the power of this treasure, Han Li believed it was something even a nascent soul cultivator could possess.